the situation
I
has
find
become,
it very difficult to wear the mask. I think so. I avoid going out as much as possible.
now we are habituated to work from home. Now the situation will, when will be normal, it will be very difficult to move us from the home.
Yeah, I agree.
it will be.
We are all spoiled now.
Yeah.
Okay, we might just wait another minute and then make a start, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we should make a start. It's 2:30 in Adelaide, 3 o'clock in Canberra and 10:30 in India. So let's get started. Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today to learn more about the missing women's labour force in the Eastern Gangetic Plains. We know that women's participation in the workforce has been declining over the past couple of decades in India. And today we'll hear some of the reasons for that and consider the implications also of the COVID-19 pandemic. My name's Tamara Jackson, and I work with the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research to help manage the Sustainable Development Investment Portfolio. The ACR SDIP program works across the Eastern Gangetic Plains of Bangladesh, India and Nepal with the aim of improving food, energy and water management for sustainable food systems. And this program is part of a portfolio of work that's funded by the Australian Government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So just to give a little bit of background and where this work fits into the SDIP program, and so that you understand a bit more about the program, it looks at multiple elements of the food system and works at different scales from farm to regional levels. So we have projects focusing on promoting sustainable farming systems based on conservation agriculture, identifying effective institutional arrangements for agricultural development, exploring biophysical and socioeconomic constraints, and the impacts of change in agricultural systems, and synthesising the wider context of water and energy within the food system. And as part of the program, Professor Sen undertook a study on the role of women in agriculture in the Eastern Gangetic Plains a year or two ago, and it really highlights the different patterns of how and how much women are engaged in agriculture in the EGP, both at macro and micro levels. And while feminisation is occurring in both Nepal and Bangladesh, in India the story is very different. And so it's interesting to look at that in a broader sense, and then also in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Professor Sucharita Sen is a professor at the Centre for the Study of Regional Development in the School of Social Sciences at JNU in Delhi. She was a Nehru Fulbright Fellow in 2009 and 10 and was associated with Ohio State University during that time. Between 2016 and 18, she headed the South Asia Consortium for Interdisciplinary Water Resources, SAKI Waters, in Hyderabad, which is a research institution that specialises in water issues. She's an economic geographer and has published in areas of agriculture, natural resource management, rural livelihoods in both international and national platforms. Her recent work is on labour, gender, water and societal aspects of climate change, both in the context of peri-urban spaces around large metropolitan cities and rural India. She considers teaching as her passion and finds a great deal of satisfaction in engaging her students in classrooms. And she supervised over 50 MPhil and PhD students. And I'm sure that all of us who've had the pleasure of working with Sucharita really respect her passion and commitment for her work. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say today. Just before we start, a couple of housekeeping rules. Please keep your microphone on mute unless you're invited to comment or ask a question. My colleague Kuhu Chatterjee will moderate the question session after Sucharita's presentation, and we'll have about 20 to 25 minutes. If you want to make a question or a comment, just note that in the chat box. and Kuhu will invite you to speak. We've kept it as a meeting format just so that we can have a bit of a discussion as opposed to a webinar. But please keep your comments brief so that we can get through as many as possible. And with that, I'd like to pass over to Sucharita to start her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me for this talk. It has always been a great pleasure to work with all of you. And so, can you all see the screen? No.
We're not sharing yet. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's visible?
Yeah, yep, that's perfect.
Thanks. Okay, so I'll be, you know, what I'll do today is do my thing in two parts. I'll try and connect it, but it is disjointed in the sense that the first part of the study is based on what Tamara was talking about, first part of the presentation, which was a study funded by ACIR, conducted by Saki Waters, which I was heading at the time that we did the study. We had a large team, and the team members' name have. Then here Sunita is there with us. Shomi is there with us. Shomi is my PhD student. She's been helped a lot from from this particular work because her work is related. I am sorry, I've lost the share screen. Is the share screen still visible?
No, it's not. Okay.
Yeah, now it's back.
Now it's right.
Yeah, okay. So that's the first part. I will try and link what our findings have been with the implications of COVID on women's work. And the difference is that the first part focuses on the Eastern Gangetic Plain. So it's Bihar and West Bengal in India, and Bangladesh and Nepal. I will show you the map as to what exactly we have covered. And the second part, I mean, there is very little evidence still now, but I've gathered, I was a part of a study which looked at workers of different kinds, including migrant workers. I'll bring in some insights from there and try and link our findings with what appears to be the case in India. Basically, you know, the first part of the study, it's the lower Gangetic Basin. I think one of the ways in this way this study was special was because it connected a river valley, even though a lower part of the river valley, but you know, you did have upstream and downstream concerns there. So Nepal, India and Bangladesh, in that sense, it is from upstream to downstream. And there's some other work which I have done on the Brahmaputra River Basin, where I've analyzed the genderscape of that, and there is tried to bring together the physicality and the women's role along the river. So this also gives us a bit, the treatment here is a bit different, but it gives us an opportunity to do that. So this particular region has shared concerns in the sense that poverty, you know, dependence on agriculture and all of these things are kind of common. And as I was saying, in terms of the physicality, but not constrained to it, there are a lot of heterogeneities also. Now, from the existing literature, where we started the study was that, you know, that there are disconnected macro studies and micro studies, and particularly vis-a-vis India, there seems to be a disconnect in the sense that while many of the macro studies actually have told you even before we started the study that there has been decades, a few decades, 3 decades of reducing, you know, women work participation, both in absolute and relative terms. Many of the micro studies which look at women's role in agriculture, very valuable in their own right. But many of them actually starts with the assumption of feminization, whereas we have been seeing a defeminization in India. So one of the inspiration of starting the study was attempting to connect these two. And this is the broad area. The colored area is what we have done. The crossed area is actually the Brahmaputra basin, but we have taken a part of the Brahmaputra basin also in our study to just keep continuity from the with the earlier study which had worked on Eastern Gangetic Plains. Now, I was just talking about this physicality and, historically, and there is some literature, like I've quoted Krishna and Anindita Datta's study here, where, the river valleys are supposed to be historically of better quality, higher value of land, demand for labor has been high because you've had high productivity. Men stayed back. The need to control agricultural land was greater in these places. And also, not only this, you've historically, maybe now it has changed, you've had men coming in, other men from other region actually coming into work in these areas. So property rights, what has happened as a result of that is that property rights have been extremely skewed in favor of men. Not only that, the workspaces and other gender-related concerns have been quite strong in such regions. In contrast, the upstream region here, the comparison is Bangladesh and India on the one hand and Nepal on the other. Areas of rugged spaces, less constricting influence on gender mobility for work. So it was less productive historically area of outmigration. So no matter how in reality the gender empowerment or gender relationships are, you have studies which have said that river valleys, so need to control land as opposed to the river valleys have been far less here, and more of women presence in the workspaces. And what Sumi Krishna in 2009 actually has talked about river valleys historically creating patriarchal heartlands, and it's while the peripheries have had somewhat of muted patriarchy. So, this is how we can conceptualize, and we would actually see that this, we look at the work participation numbers, it would actually conform to that. So there is a broader feminization premise in the developing part of the world, particularly vis-a-vis agriculture. So there are a lot of global south studies which actually expect feminization to happen, and there are certain reasons for that. One is that, any broader area which has been identified as male selective outmigration has automatically been perceived as regions of agricultural feminization. Feminization in terms of spread of work, in terms of intensity of work, in terms of quality of work. I'll be talking primarily about the spread of work, that is work participation and unemployment, which is the first part. But if we see a defeminization here, it's a very basic level of gender disparity. The second reason has been that generally all of us know that there is a lack of women along with the elderly and the children. And in India, if you look at the data, the total work-related migration from both intra and interstate migration, only 15% of that are women. The other thing also is that women, the kind of work that they do, it has to do with the rural labor conditions and gender relations. And women's work, both in terms of space and time, is highly fluid between domestic work and other work. So a lot of the work which is not seen is something which would be categorized as a productive sector, but the women actually do that work within the domestic space. And there are a lot of expenditure saving work, like say collection of fodder fuel water, which is emerged quite important in our study, which if they hadn't done it, there would be an expenditure which would be involved to to substitute that. So those kinds of work actually, number one, it's invisible, and it connects women to the kind of rural life and rural economy in a manner which is very different and much more inseparable compared to that of men. So the three things that we will be looking at here, that what are the broad trajectories of women's participation in agriculture. Second is what are the processes. I'll be very brief about that. We've done it in quite a detailed format in our work. And the last part, which was not part of our work, is the implication of the post-COVID scenario on women's work. So I can discuss about the data subsequently. If there are questions, I will skip that as of now. So if you look at the work participation rates, the first thing which strikes you, that if you look at the absolute work participation rate, the difference between men and women in India and in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh, it has been narrowing, which is more a result of the way the data was capturing women's work, which has changed over a period of time. And some bit of it is also, of course, real increase in participation. In India, you can't actually see it here, but if you look at the rural relative work participation rate, you can see both for EGP and All India, it's on the decline particularly from 2000. And in Nepal, in contrast, like I was saying, that how you can conceptualize women's work in the more hilly areas, there is very little difference between men and women, and this has further shrunk. I mean, there was very little space for it to shrink anyway, but there is an increase in the relative work participation rate over a period of time. Now, if we look at this is quite interesting and different. So there is broadly a inverted U-shaped curve. If you did analysis of work participation rate by age group. So these are the age groups. This is the work participation rate. So it is less when you are younger, I mean, as we would expect, then at the highest working age group, it peaks and then it falls. So this is for the women, this is for the men. Both are inverted U-shaped curve. It is noticeable that in the first period in Bangladesh, it wasn't really for women a U-shaped curve, and it declined soon after the age of marriage, which is now kind of changed and resembling more of an inverted U-shaped curve. Now, what you see is that we are talking about a falling work participation relative and absolute work participation rate. Now, this fall is at the age group which is the primary working age group. So it is not here, unlike that of the men, where the fall is due to education-related withdrawal. And and in Nepal, what you see is that there is actually an increase in the work participation rate for both men and women. But the concerning factor is that the agriculture is now, the increase is in the elderly age group. So agriculture is now more dependent on elderly workforce, which is something which is very specific to Nepal. Now, this is broadly the map, and we can have a look at the second map here, where all the pinks and the reds are indicative of defeminization, and the greens are indicative of feminization. So over a period of time, of course, the time frames are not exactly the same for the three countries, given the kind of data. So you do see Bihar, which is a traditional area of out-migration. We have a lot of news about that. Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, these are the two primary states from where out-migrations happen, is actually an area of defeminization, which is contrary to what we popularly believe. West Bengal is a mixed picture. Nepal, it looks different, but most of the workforce is actually in the Terai region, and that has been feminizing. And Bangladesh, it has primarily been feminizing. but I must, as I mentioned, more because of the data than actual increase. That's what the feedback. I was just having a chat with Srinita today. That's the kind of feedback that we have from the field. This is a broad India map, and again, the reds and the pinks are all over the place. So it's not something which is specific to the Eastern Gangetic Plain, was just my purpose. And now, these are some photographs from Nepal, where you see women in all kinds of workspaces, whether it is livestock-related work, I mean, just field work, you see women very, very commonly. That's a common sight. And this is a kind of a fluid space scenario where you can see garlic, which is being graded within the domestic space which is often undercounted. In case of Nepal, though, I must mention that the way they look at work and way they measure work is much more inclusive than compared to West Bengal, I mean, compared to India and Bangladesh. Bangladesh, you see two examples. Sitting here, this woman is carrying cooked food for the laborers in the field, which is an expenditure saving work which gets undercounted all the time. And here is post-harvesting work. Women in Bangladesh don't generally, even though this is reducing a little bit, but they don't work in the field but are engaged in post-harvesting work. The other factor is that in all the three countries, there is an increased unemployment, and relatively speaking also, both in absolute and relative terms, there is an increase in the female unemployment rate. That is relative to men also, on their own also. So in case of India, you can see this. Now the question to consider, very important one, which is important for the COVID situation, is that there is, while you have a very contradictory kind of picture of a falling work participation and labor force participation rate and an increasing unemployment rate. So what are the implications? The implications are that the women have not gone out of the workforce because they wanted to. It implies some kind of a distress-induced process of withdrawal. So if they actually, so there is one broad explanation for this, which other scholars have given, is a prosperity-induced withdrawal, which does not seem to be the case here, because if that was it, then the rising unemployment actually is contradictory to that finding. So if we come to India, you know, let me focus just two here. I mean, the two things which the study come out with, which the other studies have not looked at, is that one is its relationship with the common property resource related work, that is collection of fodder, fuel, water, and other associated kind of work, relationship with that and increased burden of that with the decreasing work participation rate. This seems to have borne out with the macro data analysis that we have done. The second thing which we have found is that there has been an unemployment problem in India for the last decade, and at least 2005 onwards and more 2010 onwards, men have been returning to rural areas. There has been a scarcity of work and the conditions of work are unfavorable in the urban areas. So much before the lockdown actually happened, you have seen a gradual increase of that, and that has could have had an effect of replacing women. I am going to skip this, but this is a photograph from the field where one of the examples is that the entire landscape has been changed from agriculture to fish farming, pisciculture. So you can see the Google image where the entire land is waterborne now, and that has led to not only to the loss of agricultural land, but it has led to the loss of the common property resources also. So the difference is that the kind of worker that are engaged in the current economy is more men workers from the outside who are hired, and much less of them compared to agriculture. This is one small example that we came across, and a lot of women have now been converted to non-workers who were working in their own land or working as cultivators, as agricultural laborers. So, so why men, like this example, they have started earning, landed men have started earning through renting out their land through, for fishing, but women have of the same household, which are more favored, have actually dropped out of work. Now, this is, of course, I've mentioned this. Also in the field, we have seen that evidences of men coming back also, but also evidences of mechanization at the same time. So what you do have is, the agriculture profits have been falling. So you have to understand all of this in the backdrop of the larger agrarian distress in India, which has ailed it for quite some time now, over a decade, and falling relative profits in agriculture. To save on the wage rate, you have had mechanization, but also you have had men coming back. And, also there is some evidence to suggest from other work and our field is that with mechanization, women even more go out of work. So broadly, if I was to sum up this, way the work is measured is reflective of the cultural context, and it invisibilizes women's work more in Bangladesh and India. Feminization in Nepal and Bangladesh is indicative of, a number of things, but partly male selective outmigration in Nepal and the way the and some increased numbers and the way the data is seen. Defeminization in India as part of the EGP suggests varied kind of processes. It potentially, barring the economically favored, it seems to be, there seems to be indications of a distress-driven withdrawal. Now, this has to be understood, I'm convinced about this, in conjunction with the agrarian distress ailing the economy. And we have actually seen evidence in the India's case that it is not necessary that all male selective outmigration leads to the feminization of agriculture. Now, coming to the pandemic, we have some work, very rapid work done by one of my colleagues, Vikas Raval. He actually says that, you have seen delays in harvesting and marketing. He's done all India kind of a study, rapid study. There has been increased cost of storage. There is a general fall in prices for many crops. There is a shortfall in market arrivals, but at the same time, there's a shortfall of demand. So, people, at least the, visible demand, that is, less people are going to the market to buy. And there are evidences of farmers abandoning perishable crop and they're not able to sell it. And a heightened job loss, which is, something that brings me to the study which I was a part of, which we did during the lockdown, and we were trying to gauge job loss and hunger. And we saw that it was a sample of 1,400 laborers, workers, from various areas in India, and 92% of them had lost their jobs. And this job loss, strangely enough, was not less for rural India compared to the urban, even though agriculture was not in a state of lockdown. There was no overt in terms of the job loss, overt gender differences. However, when we looked at the quality of the job loss, we did find some gender specific concerns. That is, women and the elderly were left behind in rural areas, and they were suddenly, the income has fallen, and as a result of that, this has led to heightened distress because you have the dependency ratio is much higher here. We also saw concerns about single mothers, that even with the same kind of wage losses, the suffering that they were undergoing to feed their children, and this is true both of urban and rural India. And the lockdown has actually led to abandonment of wives and children by the men. We saw cases of that. Also, there is a deepening dependence of Dalits on the upper caste because of the kind of loans that they were taking from several places. Now, one of the things which is very important is that the pandemic has led to an increase in the care work for women. So children are off the school, elderly have to be cared more, food requirements are more because everybody is staying home. Services which were provided by others now are completely being cross-subsidized by women labor. Poorer women, so also it is the job of the women to provide the food to the members, and in a situation that you have abject hunger and poverty, it is that work actually comes to the women. And we have some lessons from the Bengal famine to learn from this, where women were going out and finding in the common land, finding edibles from there and putting it on the plate. So also there is a recent study of Deshpande and Kabir which actually relates which we were trying to tell earlier in our finding, that care burden magnitude is completely, directly related, is inversely proportional to the work participation of women. So with this care burden and with the other common property related work where cross-subsidization of household income would depend more on that, you can actually visualize a situation where the work participation rates might further fall. And this could be true of Bangladesh and Nepal as well. And we have already seen unmet needs for women's work, that is increasing unemployment rates, and these are likely to increase. Now, I would like to, I'm running out of time, but I would like to spend 1 minute on this. So this is some figure from the CMI, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, and that is that keeps unemployment watches over unemployment on almost a daily basis in India. Now, how they measure unemployment is a little different, also work participation rate. And the special thing is that they have something which they call as a greater unemployment rate other than a normal unemployment rate. So what is the normal unemployment rate? It includes individuals, the numerator is individuals who are looking at, who want to work and actively looking for work, divided by the total population in the working age group. The greater unemployment rate actually also includes individuals who want to work but are not actively looking for work. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So, so what you really see is that in the December 2009, just before the lockdown, there is a huge difference. Even then, there is a difference between the unemployment rate and the greater unemployment rate. That is, for women, though they want to work, they are not looking for work, and we can only kind of guess what this reason might be. And to my mind, this is to do with their highly constrained and increasingly constrained condition in terms of the care burden of the domestic and extra domestic work, and their inability to work in the kind of jobs which are available. So there is a 10 percentage point difference between the unemployment rate and the greater unemployment rate. So they do want to work and not looking for work, assuming that the kind of work that they can do are not available for them. Now, when you look at the lockdown period, January to April 2020, there is not much difference in the women's. There's an increase in the men's unemployment rate, but the women's unemployment rate is almost stagnant. That is the plain unemployment rate. But when you look at the greater unemployment rate, that has further increased. So that, 10, the difference here was 10, it has become 17. It was 7 here, it has become 12. So I mean to say that given the constraints of the care burden and the other work and the burden falling on the women to ward off hunger and subsidize the income in some way, in all the household domain, it has actually worsened the condition, and something which, other than the CMI data, would like to pass as, it would not be noticed. So I think this is a very, very important indicator for us to kind of understand the kind of situation that the women are in. So if you look at the monthly unemployment rate, and unfortunately we don't have it for men and women in breakup, we do see that, of course, the lockdown period, it had gone up tremendously, the unemployment, which has come down to the pre-lockdown period. In fact, for the rural area, it's slightly better. Of course, the quality of work and the wages and all are, we would have to see what they are. So what are the potential consequences of falling labor force participation and workforce participation for women? Primarily for men also we are seeing that, but I think relatively speaking, women are going to be worse off, and the trend that we saw before is going to continue. Migrants, and in our study also we had qualitative in-depth interviews. Migrants were coming back to the rural areas. Some of them, there is some report that some of them are going back, but not all of them. And many of them, for the kind of indignity and distress they suffered in the urban area, they at least said that there is no immediate plan to return. If this is true, then it would actually make a lot of demand on the kind of work that agriculture has. Then some studies on Ebola and Zika tells us previously that there are evidences of disproportionate reduction of social, economic, sexual, reproductive, and regulatory choices. Increased maternal mortality is one of the immediate effect, is also there in the earlier evidences. Reduced access to resources. Some UK report tells us currently of the COVID-19 of increasing gender wage gaps. Now, I want to complete this presentation with two different things. I won't go into the detail. One is, in case of India specifically, vis-a-vis the missing workforce among women, there is the relationship between the labor and the capital needs to change. Now, we have observed through, stories and media reports, but it's enough for us to understand that urban workspaces where men used to migrate is quite hostile. The conditions are very precarious, so much so that if they lose job, they do not have food for even 15 days. So given this kind of a situation where the labor migration was driven by the needs of the capital, the growth process has to become more defined by needs of labor than needs of capital. This is like asking for a fairy tale, but I think if we have to see a better world, this is one of the things I think has to happen. The second is the skewed kind of treatment of our agriculture. The growth process has been highly urban-centric. The investments, both private and public, has been coming more to the urban areas, less to agriculture. So unless and until with this kind of work burden, and agriculture traditionally has hosted a lot more work vis-a-vis its output, unless we unless we want to see the distress of this kind going on, we have to give much more attention to agriculture, primarily through strengthening public investment, is what I would think. But recent changes in labor laws, and I can talk about all of this in question answers with this, and there is this environmental impact assessment 2020 draft. 10th August was the last date where the citizens could actually have spoken about it. They do not present a very inspiring pathway. It actually is reverse from what I'm suggesting. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I've overshot the time, and thanks. Thanks.
Thank you, Sucharita. I think you can now stop sharing your screen.
Yes.
That was a very interesting presentation, and we've been involved with your work, but the angle of COVID-19, how it has made things even worse. It's a lot to think about for the future if we have another pandemic. So I will go through questions as they come. And the first question is from Pragya Timsina. And she's asking, what are the implications of returning men and mechanization on women who were actively involved in agriculture?
Implication of men returning on women.
And mechanization.
Okay. Should I answer this first?
Yeah, we'll take questions one by one.
Okay. See, in a situation where the output of, as I was saying, that we have to look at this problem definitely in the backdrop of the agrarian industries. Now, what the agrarian industries has done is, I think the defining feature of that is being increasing cost of cultivation, and the prices of the output has not kept pace with that. So the real income of the farmers have been reducing over a period of time. There are other elements of this, but this is one of the defining features. So the kind of disposable income that or the profits, if the farmer has to make profits, that needs to come out of, among other things, saving of labor costs. Now when men come back to agriculture, it's not as if so they are coming back they went away out of a distressed situation because there was not much job. Now when they're coming back, the bargaining power of men wanting a certain kind of wage rate, which was one of the reasons why women started being employed, that they were willing to work at a lower wage rate, that kind of becomes much more fluid. That under distress condition, what you see now, men are willing to work for a lower wage rate. And mechanization, I would like to point towards slightly different aspect, even though I think the ACIR work actually shows that in specific cases, women are also involved in, a different kind of mechanization altogether. But generally, what studies are there, they actually point towards the fact that machines and men, and I would like to give you the example of Bhutan, where I happened to actually go for the Brahmaputra work. Bhutan is one of the most favored gender spaces, but even there, machines are not used by women. So this is somewhat cultural, and some of it is also, that cultural element has continued to the recent times because many times it requires a knowledge base, it requires a different way of working, which is not so accessible to women. So I feel both these two things and the conditions under which men are returning would have an impact on women's withdrawal from workforce, given the fact that additional jobs are not there.
Okay, I'll go fast because the questions are coming very fast. So I think Apurva Chaudhary from UBKV in West Bengal has a few comments. Apurva?
First, I would like to congratulate Sucharita ma'am for excellent talk. I am not a social scientist, but I am working on SRFSI project for the last 7 years. So, when you are comparing the feminization or defeminization in West Bengal, my specific intention is that you have studied in the Eastern Gangetic Plain. But if you see that in West Bengal,
I missed the last part of your sentence.
That's a Eastern Gangetic Plain, you have focused your studies.
Yeah.
Okay, but in West Bengal, if you see that if you grouped into three, that is divided into particularly the Himalayan and Terai region, then lower Gangetic Plains, and third one is the red lateritic zone. So in Gangetic Plain, obviously the agriculture productivity is more. And where the agriculture productivity is more, my experience is that involvement of men is more, relatively more. But where there is a challenge of particularly in productivity, particularly in Himalayan or Terai region or red lateritic zone in West Bengal, you will find that relative rate of involvement of women is more. Suppose in red lateritic zone, Bakura or Purulia, you will find more than 22% involvement of women in agriculture sector. Again, my experience is that where there is a dominance of the backward communities, you will find more involvement of women. But where there is a dominance of the minority population, you will find less dominance of the women workers. Suppose in Malda, it is only 7 to 8%. And so after working with the SRFSI project, this project has given the opportunity to the women in many avocations. Last 5 years, you will see that many avocations, women are engaging themselves in different activities of the agriculture. Like one of the example I am giving, that is the women rice seedling factory. Last 3 years or 2 years, more than 70 rice seedlings factory. And these are the running by the women. So this is my experience. Another is that in case of you have given the examples of Purva Mendipur. But if you see the Paschim Mendipur, you see that in Paschim Mendipur, the involvement of women is more than Purva Mendipur. These are my few comments on the feminization or defeminization in West Bengal.
Thank you, Apurva. We have many more questions coming up.
Okay.
Now, Madhav Karki has a comment and a question. Madhav?
Again, without going to any formality, I just wanted to ask Dr. Sen that in EGP, especially in the plains, we have a very distinct what we call the rich-poor divide. So my question was, have you looked from the income class? Maybe the withdrawal would be higher in the middle and the higher income class rather than the, relatively speaking, rather than the poor and the Dalits, who have to find some job. There may be more job switch rather than job withdrawal. So post-COVID, I think that situation will be even worse, because I think the poor have to find some way to feed. So that was my question. And the second, of course, you touched upon the landscape, the river basin context. But definitely in case of Nepal, there is a higher feminization in the hills, but also in the Tarai, because of the huge outmigration of male, the feminization also exists in Tarai. So I think the poverty and the socioeconomic condition is one of the major determinants of feminization and defeminization. Thank you.
Can I reply to this? Yeah, so Madhav, the thing is, in fact, what you point out is, I mean, I could not show that slide, but what you point out is a kind of intuitive kind of a feel. But what we actually saw was just the reverse. That is, the defeminization in India has happened across income groups. We did not have income, we had monthly per capita consumption expenditure, which is a good indicator for dividing into class groups. we actually saw that the poorer women from poorer households withdrew more compared to the richer household. So that went against, I mean, of course, as I was saying, that the withdrawals have been across the board. But in terms of intensity, the withdrawal has been more from the poorer groups, which is counterintuitive in the sense that you would argue that they are the women, those households actually require the women to work for whatever they can. Now that actually ties up with the class nature of the common property resource hypothesis which I was proposing, that they are the ones who have to depend more on fodder for livestock because they don't have land. They have to depend more on fuel from the CPR which is freely available, and water from outside because they won't unlikely to have it within the premises. So that actually falls in also with the fact that we see a higher unemployment, rising unemployment, while we see a falling work participation rate. So it all falls together, and one of the reasons why this would be there over a period of time is there has been a degradation of the common property resources. Agricultural lands have expanded wherever they could. There is also privatization of the common property resources, and we have found, I mean, I have not done very extensive studies on that, but a small literature-based studies that I did on Gujarat actually suggests that the policy, as well as what has happened on ground, is a taking over of the common property resources by private individuals for greenhouse cultivation, etc. So actually we see just the reverse of that. I mean, in the sense that greater withdrawal, and that is what makes it extremely problematic. I mean, this, of course, if there was a prosperity-induced withdrawal, that is, richer women did not need to work and they are moving out of work, that would still be a problem in terms of gender barriers. That is, women are usually not permitted to work outside the home space. But in terms of economics, it would be a good thing. But what we are seeing is actually economic distress of sorts. And I'm afraid that the COVID condition is going to heighten this. Yeah.
Dr. Sen, I just had one clarification. Is this study somehow, it may not be intentional, biased toward formal sector rather than informal sector? Because my assumption, again, my intuition is that in South Asia, women work more, especially in rural areas, in formal sector rather than formal sector.
They are all working in informal sector. Informal in the sense that, see, in rural areas, there is that thing of formality and informality does not exist, no, because agriculture is not taxed. So it's all private individuals doing work. The entire family labor, unpaid family labor, is in that sense informalized. Even the casual wages are in the informal sector. Anyway, the kind of data that we depended on, it is dependent on a very huge sample of all the individuals. So there is no such bias.
Thank you, Sucharita. I think we just have time for 3 questions. 3 last questions. I would like to, Fraser Sugden, who's all the way from UK, he has a question on mechanization. Fraser, would you like to put your question?
Thanks for that presentation. I find that really fascinating. It kind of goes against a lot of the common assumptions about agriculture in Gangetic Plain. I just thought about feminization. We did a bit of a longitudinal study over 12 years, revisited some villages in eastern Terai of Nepal. And of course, one of the biggest change was shift towards mechanization of things like grain preparation, so much more use of grain mills, for example, some use of harvesting equipment, obviously manual threshing has been replaced with mechanical threshing and so on. This is actually seeing a withdrawal of women from tasks which were extremely labor intensive, female led tasks. Is there potentially an opportunity for women if there is, because of mechanization, if they have, in terms of their overall well-being, in terms of their role in the most labor-intensive tasks in agriculture, which possibly this time could be reallocated to more productive activities, which could actually give some direct income flow to women themselves. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so valid observation, but I think it all depends on the kind of work which is available in agriculture. So in the current condition, we actually are seeing that agriculture is housing an unfair burden of employment vis-a-vis the kind of revenue it produces. That is, if you compare the urban and the rural being primarily dependent on agriculture for providing employment, you actually, you create that scope. That may well be there if you had productive avenues for the rural to diversify. So I think what I was concluding with my talk with is a greater public investment, not only in agriculture, but if you have, you have to create capacities in agriculture to provide this workforce. The employment, productive kind of employment, which women could then, if they are relieved of their very tedious work, they would have other opportunities. At this point of time, I don't see those opportunities. So I think a lot has to be done to develop the non-farm sector, the related sector. So one of the things which has happened during COVID which is kind of not so visible, is the agriculture-based trading, which has suffered because all the supply chains have been destroyed. Of course, it is temporary in nature, but even compared to the work which was there, even those are not there. And what was there to start pre-COVID was not at all encouraging. So I think, if they're relieved out of work, there has to be something which is waiting for them where they could actually go for, better opportunities, which is not the condition at the moment, is my view.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sucharita. I think I will give the mic to Mr. Raju Kapoor, who has a couple of questions. I think it will be better if you ask one or two questions directly.
Okay, thank you so much, Kugu. Dr. Sen, Professor Sen, thank you so very much. It's a great presentation. Just wanted to find out, the latest things where we see almost like a record level of sowing that has happened, and the rural, there's a lot of money being pumped up into the rural areas. So how do you see we are expecting possibly a highest ever production of all agriculture across the board. So how is that going to impact the employment of women in agriculture? That's number one. Number two is now, because there's a lot of, till September, everybody in the rural areas is all covered for food also, right? So they have this per head, something like the rice and the pulses are free. So is that making them kind of becoming a little more complacent? And then is that going to impact the overall trajectory of them seeking employment? Because Manrega is also pushing in a lot of money there.
The sowing is something I was not aware about. Thank you for sharing that piece of information with me. I was not updated so far as this was concerned, but this is something I would expect, because there are male workers who have gone to agriculture. Anybody with any land would try to maximize the returns from agriculture simply because they do not have any other option. I am not sure that a lot of money is being pumped into the rural areas. Yes, the expenditure on Narega has kind of gone up. It has expanded a little bit. But actually after the rains, even that has stopped. And these are media reports, very recent media reports, where people are trying to go back now because that work has also stopped, and that was the only kind of work which was there. Now, I am not sure that I do think that the food support has to be there, because I don't think there is this, I mean, I frankly speaking think that the bargaining power is not there with the rural labor at all, with any labor for that matter. So I think the complacency can only come if you have the bargaining power, because food is not your only basic requirement. That is less than basic. So food is one of the basic things that you need to live, but that's not adequate for you to live. So I don't think that in the absence of any other kind of work, I think in fact there should be much greater protection of a temporary kind, maybe through other subsidies, and greater, I think much more in the NREGA front, more than we are doing currently in the temporary short-term period. In the long-term period, we have to make agriculture more productive so that investments from there can actually go into the non-agricultural sector. So sorry, yeah. So that's all.
Okay, I think that so Charita, I'll go to the last question for today. This is from Aditi Pradhan. She's asking, her question is, which age group is best suited for calculating the woman LFPR?
Well, it depends. Women LFPR, you take the, I mean, generally we take 15 to 59. It can be 15 plus also. There are different countries which actually look at it in different ways. But if you want to, there is also child labor, the problem of child labor. If you wanted to look at that problem, you might want to create, I mean, look at how many children are wanting to work, are willing to work. So it would depend on the purpose of your study. So if you are wanting to look at the kind of stock of labor that you have, then 15 plus. And why I would not stop at 59 for agriculture is that, as you saw in case of Nepal, many of the elderly are actually working. So you would miss out on that if you stop at 59. But if you wanted to look at the problem of the child labor, then you would have to look at the younger age group. That is.
Thank you, Sucharita. Thank you so much for spending your time. Now I will hand it over to Tamara, who has the last say, I must say.
Oh, now I can unmute. Thank you, Kuhu.